Welcome to the continuing education module entitled Useful Frameworks for Wellness Consulting, using high-impact visuals. Our agenda for this module includes an overview of worksite wellness industry, and I'm looking at the importance of unifying conceptual frameworks in consulting. We'll then look at the WellCert unifying frameworks, and we'll include 6 examples: that of wellness strategies, the wellness development model, a program planning process, a program evaluation framework, a risk stratification process, and the AMSO construct developed by Michael O'Donnell, and then a summary of key points. Let's take a quick snapshot of the worksite wellness industry and corporate wellness industry. 40 plus years of early innovators and early adopters. We're now probably in the late majority. So we've moved across through early majority into late majority as part of Shoemaker's diffusion of innovation model. The early model was for worksite wellness was really a corporate headquarters fitness facility base. So that's what most of our initial literature really starts from, was the idea of a fitness facility which kind of grew into an area of being able to work on the health and well-being and economics of worker health. 30 to 80% of employers have a wellness program depending on the size of the employer. The larger the employer, the more likelihood that there is a wellness program in place. Less than 7%, as I look around the landscape of the American worksite wellness field, are what I would call comprehensive or results-driven wellness programs. So those are basically saying that there are not an awful lot of them that adhere to all of the things we essentially know from our science and from our literature are important in these kinds of programs. Most common interventions that you'll find in virtually all wellness programs are the use of well-being assessments or health risk assessments, screening activity and biometric screening, physical activity programming, food service improvements, smoking policies, websites, wellness coaching, and health fairs. So those represent to me some of the more typical interventions. Without incentives, we average somewhere between 20 to 30% participation levels in the out years. We can get higher than that when we have a novelty effect of a relatively new program. But once the program's been around for 2, 3, 4 years, you're likely to see, without incentives, this level of participation. There are more than 100 peer-reviewed studies that I've found on economic return, and about 96% of those show a positive return. About 4% show a limited or virtually no return in some important economic variables for worksite wellness. One of the major problems that we're faced with in our industry currently, from my perspective, is that most of our wellness programs are underfunded and are consequently not well designed nor well funded, leaving them underperforming or performing at a lower level than perhaps the expectations of senior management about this kind of activity. Our industry size is roughly estimated to be somewhere between 2.5 and about $5.5 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but that's not a lot of money. When you look at the healthcare industry itself, in the year 2015, spent approximately $3.2 trillion. So we are spending very little on this area of worksite wellness. So this is a quick snapshot of our worksite wellness industry as we then look at some of the issues around consulting and the consulting process. We also are very likely to grow as an industry if we're found to be valuable. And to be valuable, we generally have to produce results which are expected by the people who are funding and authorizing this kind of activity. Now, what does a consultant do? A consultant, according to Webster, is one who consults someone or something, or one who gives professional or expert advice. So when we think about the wellness field and we think about corporate wellness, we are generally thinking about consultants being able to advise others about the design of their program, its implementation, its management, its evaluation. And the activities that we generally do as consultants are including educating people, providing advice about specific perceived problems, influencing choices and problem solving choices, and facilitating that solution process or the problem identification, problem solution activity. And we also are in the role of clarifying both current problems as well as identifying potential future problems. So if we think about how consultants function, we think about our role as consultants, these are the major activities we're generally involved in. And at the same time, we also are exchanging value. We're exchanging for monetary purposes our technical expertise, our subject matter expertise, our ability to facilitate and solve problems. So that's what we're about when we are doing and performing a either internal consulting role or an external consulting role. Now let's quickly examine the importance of unifying frameworks in consulting. First of all, they can provide us a basis for the measurement that we want to do and the metrics that we're going to be looking at. It can help us guide the discovery process with a client and data collection, so that construct or that framework can help that process. It also helps with problem identification. It can also help us provide more of a context for development of solutions. Usually there's a problem that someone has that then they call in a consultant to help them. There's also the issue of client credibility. So as we are working with clients as consultants, oftentimes if we can show them a construct that helps them understand more about what they're experiencing and what problems they have or how to reach solutions to those problems, that increases and enhances our credibility. It also is a way for us to connect with the client so that we, in fact, can talk about the same thing, kind of co-order our thinking about whatever it is we're looking at. It also has learning value in the sense that it helps capture and put into perspective various aspects of what we might be working on as consultants. It also allows us to actually have a working way of demonstrating a fix, because we can then identify parts of that framework or that construct and actually show the people we're working with how we might go about fixing it. It also allows us to continue our effort to solve a problem by being able to break it down into its pieces. So our ability to simplify things and then to take them apart and put them back together in a better way is oftentimes what that unifying framework can do. It also helps us achieve success as consultants by being able to provide advice that the client finds is helpful and valuable and allows us to be able to help them solve a problem that they perceive. Now let's look at some examples of frameworks that we're going to be exploring. First of all, we're going to look at 3 program models called the wellness strategies, a wellness program development process that can be used in consulting, a WellCert 6-step planning process to help guide a program plan, and the wellness program evaluation framework that allows us to logically deal with how we're going to look at our program in terms of evaluating it, a risk stratification process which was developed for the occupational medical field and we've adapted to the wellness and health promotion area, and something we call the AMSO construct developed by Michael O'Donnell, which is more of a way to make sure that your program produces long-term behavior change. So we're going to be looking at these frameworks individually and talking a little bit about how they might be used in a consulting manner. Now let's start first with our first item, wellness strategies. And one of the things that over the years of working with more than 1,000 employers, what I generally found when I started doing wellness consulting is that I found that people have very different ideas about what a wellness program should have and contain. And what I then found that I needed to do was to help people find out what constellation of approaches and strategies and interventions were associated with varying levels of results. So I can do feel good wellness, which is what we call this first strategy, and it can have the main features that you see listed here. And the HCM stands for not very health cost management oriented. It's perhaps not looking at ways to affect health plan cost for a given population. The primary focus of this first strategy is really morale oriented. So we're really working on the morale improvement, not so much health improvement or results of different kinds, but actually just improving people's sense of their perspective and value they have toward their employer by doing some things in what we call the feel good wellness strategy. These strategies are also program models, so we can think about them in that way as well. The second approach here or strategy in the diagram is traditional wellness programming. And that's where we lay out quite a few activities, interventions. We hope the right people take the right intervention and use the right intervention. And it's more like a smorgasbord kind of approach. And it's got some inherent weaknesses and problems with it. So you can kind of see some of the issues as you look down the main features and compare them on the same attribute to the feel-good wellness model. So the traditional wellness model is really more of an activity-oriented approach. It's doing a lot of activity. It's getting people moving. It's getting them involved. Doesn't necessarily help with long-term behavior change so much, but it actually gets people kind of started. In addition, we then have the results-driven wellness strategy or program model, and that's where we then add and modify those same attributes that you see in all three models. That gives you a characterization of how this particular model looks and this strategy looks. And that's more of a results-oriented strategy. So the intention is that we use this kind of approach when we want to see a lot of health improvement, a lot of economic return, a lot of health risk mitigation, a lot of changes in the readiness to change. All of those things end up being very highly affected by the results-driven wellness strategy. So our first effort here is to be able to use this on a whiteboard and essentially say, here's 3 different ways of doing wellness. And we have characteristics that are associated with each of these 3. And you may just highlight 1 or 2 or 3 of those to help the individual you're talking to or the group you're briefing to better understand that there are different ways of doing wellness. So that's our context for the use of this particular framework. And its primary use in terms of consulting is to help get people to align more correctly the level of their effort toward wellness, employee wellness, and the results that they might expect from that. And so this helps us essentially say, look, the feel-good model is just a beginning point. It's not going to produce as much in the way of concrete results that the results-driven model does. So there are different things you're going to do. Each of these moves from a lower cost to a slightly higher cost as you move from left to right. It moves in terms of higher levels of integration, higher policy support, higher senior management funding of the program, broader range of targeting. There's just a lot of things that are inherent in that you can use this diagram to help people get a sense of, so that they in fact begin to align their level of effort with their expectations in terms of what the program is going to produce. So this is the first of our kind of unifying frameworks that can be used as part of a consulting process. This next one is called the Wellness Program Development Cycle, and it essentially allows us to look at the start of a wellness program by looking at the major steps one goes through. So we first obtain a mandate for a wellness initiative from senior management. The bigger the organization, the more likely we're going to have to use a team to do this program design, and that's composing the wellness team. We then oftentimes do some research and discovery. And as we do that, we begin to look and see what other people are doing. And then we go through an internal process where we're going to identify our wellness needs. We're going to formulate goals about how much of those needs we want to address year by year. We then are selecting interventions of different kinds. We then can take the interventions that we've laid out and ask the question, what do we expect to anticipate to happen in terms of effects and outcomes? So what is this going to do for us? Once I've done through that process, I essentially then am oftentimes putting this all together into a proposal. And the proposal is something that can be then obtaining approval by presenting the core of it, the details of it, to an executive team. That executive team can then give their approval. We can do funding, we can do staffing, we can do vendor selection, and then we can go about implementation. Once we've implemented the program over that first year, we generally are going to come back and conduct an evaluation. So it brings us back into the evaluation activity that you see in the middle. And then the next year, we're probably going to go back through and make some adjustments in the various things that help us organize our wellness activities for a given location or a given organization. So this particular program development cycle I've used extensively with clients to help them understand what's a process that we could use to actually carry out the development of a wellness program for a given employer. So this particular development framework is, I've found, to be very useful in actually conducting a facilitated planning process, which is a lot of what we cover as we move from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4 in terms of our certifications under the WellCert program. So this particular program framework, it's a program development framework, is very useful in getting people on board to understand what we are doing in its larger sense around developing a wellness program. The next framework we're going to look at is what we call the 6-step planning process that we would use to design a wellness program. And this essentially takes what we just saw in the development approach and breaks it down a little deeper into the component parts that we might come up with when we get to that intervention, and we then put that intervention into that proposal and those interventions. So the first step that we have in the planning process is setting that wellness strategy, and that's the 3 models. So we're going through a process of saying this particular aspect allows us to choose, are we going to do feel good? Are we going to do traditional wellness program, or do we want to do a results-driven kind of approach? Step 2 in the process is planning our infrastructure, and there's 2 different parts to that. One is our organizational infrastructure, and that's another way of thinking of the administrative structure that the program needs to sit on or hang on that allows it to function and be sustainable. The technology infrastructure is the second part of that infrastructure, and those are essentially the things we're going to use. Primarily, they're virtual, what are called virtual interventions. So they're the things where we're using a well-being survey, and we have a particular kind of biometric screening we're doing. And we, in fact, may be doing some coaching, and we might be using a process where we have an e-health portal. So we may have some technology components that constitutes the core of our wellness program, and we want to deliver wellness support to our entire population with that technology core. So that would be part of the infrastructure. Step 3 is, once we have set our strategy, planned out what our structure is going to be, we then can ask the question, how are we going to market our activities to the population? So I want to know, what are my vehicles? What are my major messages? How do I spread those messages out? How do I work with things that are going to compel and help people feel the desire to take part in the wellness activities? Step 4 is when we are planning our health management process. And in our wellness program, any point at which we can help people monitor and track their own health and well-being and the steps they're taking toward improving it, that's what we call health management. So our ability to see where are the places in our program where we are going to do that preventive screening. And then we're going to do a retest to help people see it. Or we're going to use wearables to help them track their physical activity by monitoring their steps per day. So I've got many different kinds of things I can do in that health management process. And I know that I'm going to get better long-term behavior change if people take an active role in the feedback around the behavior they're working on. So that's what step number 4 is. Step number 5 is to help people know that there needs to be a social component, a group activities component, so that I may have education sessions, or I may start a walking club, or I may have a recreation program, or I may have ways of linking people, with buddy systems. There's all kinds of things I can do to create group activities around wellness in a worksite setting. Then step 6 is the step that we go through in the WellCert program to actually help configure that supportive environment. We need to work on the norms which affect behavior in our organization. And the way we do that frequently is in 3 major ways. We get actually management actively involved. So they set an example, they're exemplars. So they begin to kind of get actively involved in wellness. Secondly, we make changes in the physical environment. So we begin to kind of change, put in things that allow people to exercise during the workday, or walking programs that have routes and distances laid out. So we begin to make physical environment changes. And then we also make policy changes. So we begin to change our benefit program. We begin to put in flex time for exercise. We change our smoking regs or smoking policies. Or we change the kind of activities and policies that govern our subsidization of food, or how we pay for travel kinds of expenses and reimbursement around food and alcohol. So we start looking at all the different supportive environment issues that can be modified to create more of a culture for wellness. So this 6-step approach is another way, it's a parallel way that we can help people understand what's the process you need to go through as you think about how to put these various interventions together. Now, once I've gone through this 6-step process, I have done the work to actually identify what are all the interventions I will be using to bring wellness to this organization and to create that culture of wellness. So this breaks down into concrete pieces, the things that I'm going to put together as interventions. And that's where we would link it back to the other development model. So that our choice of interventions, this allows us to go deeper and to design those interventions in ways that are going to produce more in the way of behavior change with the individuals involved. So in summary, this is a very useful construct to go through with people who are thinking about putting a wellness program together, and you want them to put it together in a way that's going to optimize the amount, the probability of people changing their long-term wellness behavior. Now, this next framework is very useful because it's an evaluation framework, and it was developed originally in its rough form by Dee Eddington at the University of Michigan. And I've gone ahead and made a number of changes to it over the years, but this is what's guided a lot of Dee's research over his lifetime and his career. And it basically starts with the idea that we want to look at the needs and targets that we want to work on with our wellness or well-being effort. So each of these things that are listed has a number of different possible metrics. We then have that 6-step planning process that we just went through. So I can then talk about those 6 steps, and from those 6 steps and carrying them all out, I then have a detailed set of interventions that I can then implement during the year. As I implement them, I want to also look for intermediate results. So I may want to use, for instance, a well-being assessment, a cohort of people that completed it last year compared with this year, to see, are they changing their behavior? Are the same people still doing the same things, or are they doing healthier activities? And then also, is the testing process showing me that people are in fact healthier? Or when I ask people about their productivity, their perception of their work productivity, they give me an answer that tells me whether they think they're more productive. So I can look for some intermediate results that come and are associated with the interventions that I've introduced. I can look at intermediate results, and then I can look at more of the ultimate results. And that comes into play with economic benefits. There are 5 different types of economic variables that we look at in wellness: health plan or medical plan costs, sick leave absenteeism, workers' compensation cost, disability insurance costs, short-term and long-term, and presenteeism costs. In addition, we have value on investment, which are the other benefits which we don't generally turn into dollars. So we still want to have those effects, but we don't have a good way of turning them into a monetary or economic comparison. And we generally want to be looking at both the economic benefits and the other organizational benefits. Now, with this particular framework, there's also a feedback loop at the bottom there. And that just says, once you've gone through the evaluation for that year, you then move back and ask the question, do we want to modify any of our needs and targets? Do we want to add some things? Do we want to take some things away? Do we want to strengthen certain elements or weaken them in the context of our targeting? And then I'm going to do an abbreviated process. It's going to come up with a set of interventions for this next year. I'm then going to look at intermediate results, and at the end of next year, I'll look at the ultimate results again. So this is a very useful framework to show management that you, in fact, are using a logical approach to approaching your design and implementation, management, and evaluation of your wellness program. This next unifying framework is what we call a risk stratification process. And it basically says you have a population at risk, you're doing something like a well-being or a health risk assessment, you're using that information to identify the strata of need that you see in this first level. And these are broken out into 5 different kinds of things. That doesn't mean that's the only 5. It just means those are the groups that we're going to focus on their needs. And their needs are reflected in the bullets that you see underneath each one of those top boxes. In addition, we generally are taking incentives and communications that are personalized and helping people actually get to the interventions that are in the bottom row of boxes. So what you see here is integrated disability management. We cover that in level 4, and it involves focused intervention, targeted screening, and injury risk management. So there's some things that we can do to actually help people help manage their health, reduce their health-related costs, improve their productivity, and affect their well-being. In addition, we oftentimes have disease management activities or high-risk intervention or presenteeism-related interventions or targeted at-risk interventions or some self-guided risk management that it can be done with low risk. So the idea is in this particular process, we are laying out the kind of logical sequence of steps that would allow us to manage the health of a defined population. So this is, in a way, a model of being able to do population health management using risk stratification and a risk stratification process. This came out of and has adapted to the wellness space from work that has been done in the occupational medical arena. This last construct is really an interesting one. It was developed by Michael O'Donnell, a good colleague friend, the publisher-in-chief of the American Journal of Health Promotion till recently, and the ability for him to have looked at the literature of health promotion and wellness and asked the question, what are those keys to an effective wellness program? And they are embraced in this concept or construct or acrostic called AMSO. The A stands for an ongoing method for raising awareness of individual health and wellness issues. So I have to have a method in my program that actually helps individual employees become aware of what would help them improve their health and well-being. So that's what we call an ongoing method in our program for raising awareness of health and wellness issues. The M in AMSO stands for the ability of your program to enhance that innate intrinsic motivation for wellness that is there. And it's only there in about 20% of our populations. So we have to really come up with extrinsic sources of motivation like incentives, like lower health plan cost, to in fact draw in those individuals that are not intrinsically motivated. They become extrinsically motivated. We can then work on that extrinsic source of motivation to help convert it to intrinsic motivation. So my program, in order to be effective, has to have an ongoing method for raising awareness about health and wellness issues for the individual. It also has to have the ability to enhance what is already existing in terms of motivation with some additional motivation. We build on the intrinsic that's already there. Only about 20% have and are intrinsically motivated. We want to get to the other 80%. We use incentives and other devices to provide the motivation to have them engage in wellness. That's the M in AMSO. The S in AMSO stands for my program has to have the ability to teach people the new skills associated with the new behavior. Once I become aware that I need to change, and I know that what the behavior looks like that I want to change to, and I'm motivated to change, that's the M, I then have to have the skills to make that behavior change. So that's where my program has to help people learn those new skills. The O in AMSO means that there has to be an opportunity for people to practice those new behavioral skills. We can't just assume that once you teach them the skills, if we don't provide opportunity for them to exercise those skills, they are not going to develop those positive, healthy habits. And all that we talk about in behavior is really the formation of habits. And habits are a cue, which really generally catalyzes our thinking, and then that cue is what we then use to move into a routine. We want to leave the unhealthy routine behind, and we want to adopt a healthier routine, whether that's being active, handling stress differently, handling nutritional issues differently, getting my preventive screening done, wearing seat belts. It's all different kinds of about 300 different behaviors or activities that contribute to my health. And then that opportunity to practice is where I'm using that routine often enough so that it becomes a part of me. And then I also have rewards associated with that. I may feel good intrinsically about being of lower body weight. I may have and feel better about myself when I feel fit. So those are all the rewards that are associated with that. So the opportunity to practice those new behavioral skills for the wellness behavior that I'm changing is what I'm doing when I am forming that habit, and that habit then becomes part of who I am. So I'm internalizing that. So These are the 4 keys to an effective wellness or health promotion program. They are very important for us because if our programs don't do these 4 things, then they're not likely to produce long-term behavior change. So this particular construct called the AMSO construct that Michael O'Donnell developed is actually a very important part of something that we address in all 4 levels of the WellCert program. Now, tips for using these key visuals, and these visuals which have some real power at our ability to work on this. One is to practice drawing them by hand. So if you take these and then just sketch them out so that you could put them on a whiteboard, or you can write them on a flip chart, or you can put them on a napkin if you're in, in a Starbucks. The ability for you to practice drawing them by hand. Break down the explanation by key parts. So each of these that I went through, I broke them down by key parts to explain them to you. And that's what you need to be able to do in order to use them. You can give examples of each part so your listeners fully understand. I gave you a number of examples. So the ability for you to kind of capture the meaning of that key visual, the meaning of that unifying framework is very important. You can come back to the diagram periodically to unify your points with the construct. So you can use, for instance, those 3 different wellness strategies. And you can talk about wellness and then all of a sudden say, now that what we're talking about really fits in the results-driven model, not so much the feel-good model. So I can begin to kind of bring people back to that diagram. Each time you do that, that strengthens their understanding of how the diagram can be used and what its value is in that particular situation. You can name the image. Now I can have shorthand kind of shortcuts, the same way we have shortcuts on our computer screen and our desktop and our landing pages. We have shortcuts that come from the image. I can then talk about the evaluation framework, or I can talk about AMSO, and I can repeat it. And then every so often, I may then define it a little more, so that repeating the name and naming the image is oftentimes what I want to do in terms of connecting people with some key constructs. I also want to ask questions about their understanding of the visual. So I may say, to a group that I'm working with and consulting for, I may say, now, we've talked about AMSO. Now, what's the language that has to do with the A in AMSO? Tell me that. And then you find out how much they really have picked up from what you said. So I can use the construct to ask questions about their understanding of the value or the utility. We call utility in an economic sense is the benefit to be derived from that particular thing. Periodically, you want to revisit the image to drive home key points. So you may put that image up on a whiteboard and then come back to it later and draw some lines between what you just got through explaining and how that fits with that construct. So that helps people grasp and be able to have context and have the usefulness of these. Now, those 6 constructs that we have just looked at as examples, and some of the points about how you can use them that we just finished, that particular activity we can summarize into some key points. First of all, most wellness programs need some consulting help. There's few wellness programs that couldn't be significantly improved, and particularly with the underfunding of programs and the fact that most employers kind of get stuck and they only go a certain distance. They generally don't do all the things that they should be doing in order to make the programs more effective. Wellness has to produce results to last. So if we don't get results from our wellness programs, my belief is you will see people dumping those programs. And I've seen that happen when people have gotten frustrated with wellness. That's something that we don't want to happen because of the enormous potential that we have to improve human health and also improve the working circumstances and the productivity and the cost associated with the workforce. So we've got lots of potential good that we can do, but wellness has to produce results in order to last. Consultants need to help assure that employer wellness programs are effective. So that's one of the roles we have, either internally or externally, in terms of consulting function. Consulting requires useful and unifying frameworks. So one of the things that our 40 years of consulting with about 1,000, more than 1,000 employers, I found that I used a lot of these examples repeatedly to help people focus, to help them define problems more effectively, to help them come up with solutions in a better way. WellCert, as the certification program we provide at the Chapman Institute, provides many helpful unifying frameworks. We've looked at just 6. So we probably have 20 to 25 of these frameworks that can be used for different functions in terms of wellness. The use of common or unifying frameworks helps bring continuity to consulting efforts. And because most of us are visual learners, it's good to have these visual frameworks to help the individual understand the context of what we're trying to do. A good unifying framework should bring useful and practical insights. So we should be able to use those frameworks to bring out, either the individuals bring them out or we augment that by identifying some insights that are important and practical and useful for them. These frameworks should lead to breakthroughs. So we want the frameworks to actually help get us to a point where the client says, oh, I understand now. I see that I've got to do this. So let's spend some money on doing that. I want them to be able to get breakthroughs from that being stuck that oftentimes comes after you've done this for a few years and you kind of decide, I'm only want to do this much. I don't want to do any more. Well, these frameworks are designed to help you break through those areas of being stuck and being plateaued in terms of your approach to wellness. These frameworks should help organize solutions. They should help the individual see how to fix some of these things, because the frameworks help put, complex ideas, complex situations into more understandable context. And the future for wellness, I believe, will be bright if our programs produce results. So that's one of the reasons why the WellCert program is here, why these continuing education modules are developed. It's actually to help us get better at producing long-term behavior change with our wellness efforts. So in summary, these are some of the key points that I would probably look at related to this particular continuing education module. Now, let's cover some key questions. First of all, the first question is, what makes these unifying frameworks necessary? And I think they're necessary for 4 reasons. One is we are dealing with very complex tasks and complex relationships, and the unifying frameworks help us break those down. Secondly, there's a lack of standard conventions in the field of wellness. So those frameworks, I believe, are necessary for us to get on the same page, because we all come from different backgrounds, different disciplines, and there's very little place where those disciplines and backgrounds actually come together around convention. The third reason is that we have highly diverse knowledge bases. So our knowledge in the various people that are doing different things in worksite settings is very diverse. So we need to have something to help cut down that diversity and to bring some clarity into our approach. The fourth reason is that we need it for continuity and consistency of perspective. So if we are not using these unifying frameworks, we're not helping people develop that sense of continuity and that sense of consistency that is necessary for these programs to actually achieve the full potential that they have. The second question is, what are the best ways of using these frameworks? And I think there are 3 major things that I would suggest. One is I would use them in education. I would take opportunities to educate people using these various unifying frameworks to actually help them get a better sense of what it is they're trying to do. And then the second reason is that they are actually very useful frameworks for problem solving. So once people grasp the framework, there's logical conclusions they can draw from how those frameworks are used and how they relate to issues that they're concerned about. And I think that the third reason is we want some coordination, we want some consistency, we want some co-ordered approach to these kinds of programs. And we can get more of that if we will judiciously use these kinds of frameworks to help people get on the same page. The third question is, what are some of the best techniques for getting the most out of unifying frameworks or useful constructs? There's basically three responses to that. First of all, the ability for you to actually draw these on a whiteboard or a flip chart or a napkin if you're sitting at a table having a cup of coffee. That's the napkin talk idea. So a whiteboard, a napkin talk, and also a touch point for discussion. So you are staying with people because you've used the frameworks to actually help connect them to whatever it is you are dealing with, whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So these are some of the answers to these three questions, which relate to our overall topic of using key visual frameworks and constructs to help people get on the same page and help them solve problems in wellness in a more effective way. Now you've completed this particular continuing education module, go ahead and take the quiz. That'll help you check your own retention, your own understanding of the things that we've just covered.